we did bring up the idea of what academia is and how it's entering a conversation. So everything you say is a response. If you're entering that conversation, what's the first thing you do? Yeah, first you set it into the context, right? Imagine you're not just talking into the air or into a vacuum, you're talking to other people, right? And so for them to understand what you're referring to, you have to refer to what you're responding to and maybe what they're responding to also. Yeah, so set the context, and a lot of that happens in your introduction right before your thesis. So yeah, if you're entering the conversation, you start with the other person or the other thing. The thing, just giving the person the background. And let's say with the cat reading from before, you bring up After 8 Mints or Tuna Melts, Melrose Place. No, none of that. So it's not just bringing up the context of irrelevant things that have nothing to do with what you're talking about. It's simultaneously what? It's what they've said, but how it relates to what you're about to say. Anything else is what I call fluff. And so if you see me just like crossing stuff out in your essay and then writing fluff next to it, it's because you just added a whole bunch of filler stuff that wasn't relevant. Yeah, you were bringing up what they said, but it had nothing to do with what you're about to say or what you should be saying. So those two things are very important. After you set that stuff up, then yeah, you bring up how what you're going to say relates to that, and you make your claims and everything in your thesis and all that stuff. But it pretty much happens in every paragraph too, right? Each paragraph is supporting your thesis, so you're bringing up smaller arguments all along the way, and anytime you quote material or paraphrase it, you're relating it to what you are trying to say and argue. So it's pretty much happening with every single thing you write. Yeah, the trick is not dragging it out too long, right? Only being as precise as possible. And so that is what I'm going to focus on with you guys a lot in the first essay, is making sure that you guys only bring up what is relevant to what you're going to do with it. Otherwise, if you ramble for too long with that stuff, your reader is going to lose track of where you were actually going to go with it, or because you gave them so much information to sift through, they don't really even know how much of it applies to what you're going to say. And that also is relevant for when you quote. Does anyone know what a block quote is?
It's like a giant chunk of the quote from the text.
Yeah. When you block quote, you have to indent twice. You tab in twice, and then nothing's a block quote unless it's 4 lines or more. And that depends on where it ends up in your paragraph. If your paragraph starts over here, but then the quote goes 4 more lines down to here, it's still technically 4 lines. You have to make it a block quote. So in this case, normally with quotes, you put quotation marks, but this is special. It's indented, and you don't need to put the quote marks because you're already indenting a whole bunch, and we can see what it is. So no quote marks. You just remove those, and you've got 4 lines. And then you put the parenthetical citation. You guys know what those are? Fancy way of saying parentheses, right? Parenthetical citation, where you put what goes in that? Yeah, their last name and the page number. Now, there's going to be a lot of readings in this class where you don't have a page number, or when you're finding stuff online. I'm really glad you guys are writing this down. So that I know where their ideas end and your ideas begin, I need you to make sure you always add this. Sometimes you don't need this. We'll talk more about that later. But you will always need to have a citation for this class so that I know, okay, their ideas have ended and now you're going on with what you were going to say with it. So in this case, even if there's not a page number, you will put paragraph number. And that may be paragraph 39. I don't care. Count it out. All right? That way I can refer back to whatever you're quoting and make sure that you did it right. Normally this would just go the end here, and we'll talk more about the style with that, right? Making sure that the period's on the back and then the quote mark is there for a normal quote. But yeah, you don't need that with this. You just end with the period. Block quotes, write in your notes. You will never use these in this class. You're never going to use this. Do you know why you're not going to use this? because you don't have enough space to use this. If you are going to use a block quote, you better have like a 20-page paper. Hey, guess what? You're not going to write 20-page papers in this class. Isn't that awesome? The last paper is like 6 or 7 pages. Now, with that size of a text, remember, notice, if you have all this text and you only really needed something from here and something from here on it, then you need to find a way to consolidate that and to make it smaller. So you cut out the middle and you make it grammatically correct so that your reader doesn't have to figure out what you're talking about in this text. If all you needed is that, if all you needed is just like several phrases in this, then it could be so much shorter, and then you will not waste your reader's time and not make them forget what your whole point was that was above here that you're trying to relate it to down here. Yeah, so that's why you're not doing that. This takes up a lot of room in your essay, which is why students love using these. But what they don't understand is if you are using 4 lines of text, that means that every single thing in that text you're going to be fleshing out later in that paragraph. So the rule of thumb here, the unwritten rule, is if you're using 4 lines of text, you better have at least 8 lines explaining all the little things that are important about that text for whatever the heck you're talking about. So if you're doing that, your essay is going to be just all about this space right here pretty much. And so rather than using this as a small point in your essay, it becomes just your whole essay. So don't do this. But what you are going to do, what you're going to notice, remember I said the shortest line possible, the most succinct thing that you can find in the passage. So if you would be block quoting if you said, yeah, line 15 is the most important one, and then you just threw the whole thing down. If you only need this and this, you can do several things to shorten that. What could you do?
You can paraphrase?
Paraphrase it. Just straight paraphrasing it totally works, right? Putting it in your own words, the parts that you need, right? Or ellipses, right? Does anyone know what ellipses are? It's a fancy word for 3 dots. Now, when you add this to the text, anything that you add to a quote, you're going to bracket. Did anyone already know that? Okay, so 2 of you. So anything you change in the text, remember it's a grammatically correct sentence right now, but it won't be once you chop it up. So you're going to have to augment it. Maybe you can make it that way. Like they put a couple commas in here, and that was really just an interjection, and so you could just remove their whole interjection, and then it totally works. But generally, you might have to amend a verb or a noun or something like that. See, this only goes in the middle. You don't have to put ellipses in the front or in the back. You just make it under, right? It's not uppercase, so I know it's not the beginning of the sentence. Or if you're trying to make it grammatically correct, you do uppercase it, and you put this in the brackets. And then you get, oh, I see that. And then at the end, do the other thing. So depending on if you use this or if you just do 2 quotes, something like that, we'll work on that in a bit, but it's super important to go from what they have said to what you're going to say as quickly as possible without missing anything. A summary can be both quoting and paraphrasing, but it's their stuff. So when I say summarize, that means you could paraphrase or quote, but if I say paraphrase, then you're only paraphrasing, right? Or quote, then you're only quoting. Those are both trying to show something from someone else, not you. What are some issues that you can have with summary?
On page 31, the second paragraph, the writer has to suspend their own beliefs for a time to put yourself in another person's shoes, to be able to understand the reasoning behind their point of view.
Absolutely. That's super important. What could happen if you don't do that?
You lose your credibility?
Because, well, how would we know?
Kind of seems like you're lying or manipulating the context of it.
Yeah, what did they call that, though?
It could also become like a one-sided argument.
If you touch on them for a second and then go on before you've really explained their point, yeah.
The classic cliche syndrome.
Closest cliche. But yeah, that's it. That was the one that I was pointing to. So that's their term. Notice, anytime they put something in italics like that, and then you can see that it's a term kind of thing, this will probably help you a lot. Everything that you guys were saying was exactly on, and it causes this thing. So what is the closest cliche?
When you summarize a point, but it's not actually their entire point they made. They maybe referenced it once.
Yeah.
It's not their entire view of the author.
Anyone ever do this?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, all the time, right? You're in a conversation with someone, or how about this? It's better when it's a fight, like argument, not physical. Are you really thinking about what they're saying? How far do you get hearing what they're going to say before you already start thinking about what you're going to say next? It's like pretty quick. They're still talking, and you're waiting for them to stop sometimes, but you're not actually listening to these words. You're formulating the next thing that you're going to say. And oftentimes these fights never resolve properly. No one ever sees the other person's side. You normally like storm off, get pissed off, slam your door, F you mom, right? Something like that. You're ruining my life. The problem is you're not hearing the other person out. You're not looking from their perspective. You're manipulating their words. You're making their words into something so that it'll work for what you want. So what we call this, and what I will call you out on if you do it, is, oh look, another drawing.
Straw man.
Yeah, straw man. Yeah, so I don't have to keep drawing it. All right. When you take someone else's words and you turn them into this, is it easy to push this over? Yeah, really quick. You could just it's not fighting back, right? So what you've done is you've taken their argument and manipulated it and flattened it into this cliche. You guys get what cliches are? It's like a simplified, romanticized version of something. Now, when I say romanticized, you generally think of like love or something like that, but it's anything that you turn into a cliche rather than the real version of it. It's a simplified, more to your liking version, whether you dislike it or do like it. You can romanticize villains. You can make anything into a cliche. So rather than doing this, right, if I see you doing this, this is a fallacy. You are inaccurately representing the truth or the argument, and therefore your essay is going to be a lot shorter too when you do this. If their argument is oversimplified, then that means you don't have much to do to knock it over. And how you get content is not fluffing it up. You get content by wrestling with the person's ideas. And in order to do that, you have to see it from their side, right? Okay, so we've got no straw man. We'll cross this out too. I ain't afraid of no ghost. Okay? Yeah, closest cliche. You're going to want to remember that. You're bringing it as close as you need it to come to what they're trying to say so that you can dismantle it. And that's faulty, right? You're trying to really wrestle with their ideas. Because if their ideas are right, then you may have to change your mind, which there's nothing wrong with that. Just make sure you figure that out before you write the whole essay.